Good evening. Good evening. I won't be long. My name is Danielle Wong. I have the pleasure and honor of serving as mayor for the town of Bloomfield. I'd like, yay. Thank you. Woo! I want to acknowledge the Deputy Mayor, Tony Harrington. Please stand up, sir. Thank you so much for being here, being a pioneer. And any other counselors that may trickle in as we get going. I am so filled with joy today because this marks the beginning of a kickoff of a major endeavor that this town has been striving for many, many years. This particular council, since elected in 2023, November of last year, has rolled our sleeves up, put our shoulders to the wheels, and really dove in and created an infrastructure internally that allows us to do the work that we're doing today and that you will do after a few remarks from a few important people here tonight. We are in such a growth period in the town of Bloomfield, and I'm very excited for us. I know you've seen all the activity from road repair, from our libraries, from breaking ground in our various parks. We have stabilized our town manager's office and our financial departments, and we are really stabilizing other areas. We are in excellent fiscal health. We passed a 1.9% tax budget this past May, and we're looking to make sure that we continue to keep taxes flat for the residents. We have maintained an historic AA+ credit rating so we can pass on savings to the taxpayer and pay for that brand new library that we're building down the street here. And so we continue to be very fiscally responsible as it relates to your tax dollars, how we spend and how we pass on the savings to you. We continue to save in the places because we know when I'm gone, there's going to be more need for investment. So right now we're looking at a surplus of an unaudited $8.5 million to add to our rainy day fund. And so we are in a position to continuously invest, save in the areas, but we can't do it without you. And so today, again, marks a historical endeavor for the town. We figured out as a town council that there was a gap when it came to economic development. And we established an ordinance to establish the town center development authority that the state gives us authority to do. So our other volunteers, like this awesome gentleman behind me, can lead the way in understanding how to plan and grow effectively, efficiently, and sustainably in the town of Bloomfield. And so again, I'm excited for us. I'm excited for this town. I was born and raised here, graduated from our public schools, and I'm so excited for you all sitting here, our generations to come, and just Bloomfield in general. It's time to put Bloomfield back on the map. It's time to plan. It's time to make sure that Bloomfield is the star that we all know it to be. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening for attending the community kickoff session of the Bloomfield Town Center Economic Development Commission. I am James Michel, the chair of the commission. I am privileged to have 4 other dedicated Bloomfield residents join me in this commission. They are Julio Carrasquillo, I don't think he's here today. We have Maura Riley, Maura, thank you. Lenny Hudgen, and also Antoinette Gooley, otherwise known as Tony Gooley. On behalf of the commission, I would like to extend my thanks and appreciation to our mayor, Danielle Wong, and the town council for trusting us with this critical step for the future of Bloomfield. We will make you proud. We have been meeting since early spring to start the process of developing a strategic plan for the future of our town center. We have Goldman & York as our consultants to help us develop the strategy for the future of our town center. They have extensive experience in this space, have been recognized for the work they've done in other communities in Connecticut. We are very fortunate to have them leveraging their expertise and extensive experience to help us move forward in this direction. And as we develop the future of our town center. Specifically, we have Don Poland, who you will hear shortly, and Denise Robidoux, and Elisa Fleming, and others from the Goldman York team. We also have John Coleman from the town guiding us down this path, and we are very grateful for his leadership and guidance. We need your voice. We need your input. We need your bold creativity to help us develop a vision and plan for the future of our town center. This is what this evening is about. We look forward to engaging with you tonight and in the future, and in future discussions, as well as the survey that was released about 2 weeks ago. A postcard for the survey was mailed to every home and business in town. Once again, thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your commitment to our town as we move forward. And we need you to be part of this, otherwise it's not going to happen. So my job, along with the rest of the commission, is to guide the process, give recommendations to the council in late winter, early spring. We're going to accomplish that task. After that, they'll take it from there and move it forward. So with that said, let me introduce Don Poland from Golden in York. Don's going to walk you through where we are today, what the future development of the strategy is going to look like going forward. But a key part of this is your engagement, your involvement. You give us your input to make sure the town center reflect who lives in town. So thank you very much. We look forward to your engagement. Don?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Don Poland. I'm with the firm of Goman York, and will kind of be presenting and I'm emceeing tonight. I want to hit on a few housekeeping matters just to kind of give you guys an idea of what we're doing, where we're going, and kind of timeline. We have a presentation to give you, which I will give. It's probably going to last about 40 minutes. There's a lot of information on it. There's a lot of information on the slides. I know some of you in the back are going to be like, I can't see that. Don't freak out. I will explain to you what's on the slides. You'll know what's there, what's important. The slides will be available on the town's website, hopefully as early as tomorrow. So if you want to better look at them, you can absolutely do that. And then after I'm done presenting, I'm going to cut you guys loose to engage in a bunch of activities in the back of the room. I will introduce those right at the very end of my presentation. But with me tonight assisting is Derek, who's going to run my slide deck. Justin's in the back, Brad's in the back, Denise is in the back. I think Alyssa's still in the hallway. She greeted you on your way in. They will be available to assist you with the activities to explain them further than what I do. So with that said, I'm going to give a presentation. I'm going to try and engage you guys a little bit during the presentation. And then ultimately, the end goal of tonight is getting your input through those activities. So away we go, the town center plan. Brief project overview. And of course, slide one I'm already struggling with. Our scope of work ultimately is to engage the community, to gain information from you as feedback into the town center, its existing conditions today, and where you would like to see it in the future. This includes us establishing economic development goals for the town center, analyzing demographics and socioeconomics. That's a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight. Also market conditions. We will be doing a comprehensive analysis of zoning in the town center and how it either facilitates or possibly impedes the redevelopment of the center. And ultimately, coming up with a strategy moving forward to improve the town center. So next slide. Our typical planning process and the process that we're following through this is what we've broken down into. The simplest way of describing it is where we are, where we want to go, and how we're going to get there. But it's actually in 5 steps. That where we are, where we want to go, how we're going to get there actually was inspired by a shampoo bottle with the idea of wash, rinse, repeat. And planning should be that kind of iterative process that you're constantly doing and repeating. So right now we are very much in the where we are phase. That's existing conditions. We've been doing a bunch of analysis over the past few months, and we are going to start presenting that to you tonight. Where do we want to be in the future is the start of kind of creating a vision for the town center moving forward, and that's part of the feedback that we'll be getting from you this evening. How will we get there will ultimately be the strategies that we devise from the data that we research, you know, from what it informs us, from the community input, what we hear from the community. We will ultimately devise strategies to help improve the center. We will then also devise ways of measuring that the strategies that we're implementing are actually working and benefiting the community. And then we will also provide an implementation schedule that will help the community with how to go about implementing this plan. The worst thing that can happen with any plan is that it sits on the shelf, and this plan will be designed to actually be implemented and guide the community over the next few years. Next slide. Just so we all know what we're talking about or where we're talking about, when I say the town center, that may mean different things to different people. But the boundary we're using for this study is based on a plan that was done a few years ago called the TIF plan, the Tax Increment Financing Plan, which established 3 TIF districts in the community, one of which is the town center. So the southern boundary goes just south of where Heirloom Flats, the apartment complex, was developed a few years back. The western boundary extends over to, is it Job Lots? Yes. Sorry, I was drawing a blank there for a moment. The northern boundary is up to Geisler's. Then you can see Winterberry Mall there in the center. And the western boundary is essentially, except for one little jog, is essentially the railroad track. The eastern boundary is the railroad tracks. As part of this plan, while this is an economic development strategy for the town center, it's also intended to meet the state requirements for what's called a Chapter 132 Municipal Development Plan. I really don't want to bore you with the details. But the Municipal Development Plan, once adopted by the council, doing that plan and adopting it ultimately provides additional authorities related to financing and so forth and so on, property acquisition within the plan area. So this slide and the following 2, which I'm not going to go into the minutia of, have a bunch of details on what it is we need to capture, analyze, address, and set forth in the plan to meet the requirements of Chapter 132. Like I said, it's more mundane and boring, and therefore I just want to acknowledge it and we'll move on from it. And next slide. So, understanding markets. One of the biggest challenges I find within planning is this kind of disconnect between market conditions and community planning. And that is, it's very easy for me to ask you, what do you want in the future? And I'll give you an example. We were doing something in a community in northwestern Connecticut, little tiny rural community, probably no more than 1,800 people living in the town. That being said, a very wealthy community. And we were helping them with their little tiny town center. And when we asked the community, what do you want your town center to be in the future? Someone stood up and said, we want Nordstrom's. And we just stood there like, excuse me? You know, you're never gonna get a Nordstrom's in that community. Yes, they had the wealth to support it, but there's not enough population, there's not enough housing, there's not enough things there, people there, traffic there to actually support that. That's why Nordstrom's is at the mall, where a lot of the people go, right? So I like to make sure that these things kind of jive together, that the planning strategies are actually feasible within the marketplace. So the first thing I like to address is the idea of change. You often hear when there's a controversial development about the NIMBY response, those people that are opposed to it. And NIMBYism is real. I don't want to say that it isn't, but over my 30 years of experience in Connecticut, I've found that often it's not really just NIMBYism. It's actually a fear of change. That I look back at my father when I became a planner. He never understood what I did as a planner. But there was a proposal for a 14-lot subdivision near my parents' house. This was in Weathersfield. And it was in this area that growing up I called the swamp. It's where me and my friends used to go to play hockey in the winter. When I was a bit older, go down there to get in trouble, and so forth and so on. And I never knew my father thought so highly of it. So all of a sudden when someone wanted to develop it, my father got really upset. And I said to him, I was like, Dad, that's just kind of natural progression. And he's like, no, it's awful, it's awful. I was like, Dad, answer some questions for me. What's the name of the neighborhood you live in? He's like, Timber Village. I'm like, what's the name of the street you live on? He's like, Forest Drive. I was like, what do you think was here before your house? And he's like, I don't know. I was like, probably woods. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, well, there's someone out there that's really upset that you own your house in what used to be woods. At which point he started cursing at me and told me he didn't want to talk about this anymore. In my true father fashion, it was a wonderful quality about it. But it's that idea of change. The fact is, change is inevitable. We can't stop it. And therefore, I truly believe we need to, one, embrace change. And once we embrace it, then we can manage it. We can adapt to it. We can shape it to help guide us, or we can shape it to help guide it in a direction that is kind of acceptable to us. Next slide. Gives and gets. The other thing within the debates around community planning and stuff, it's very often, you end up with, maybe two sides of an issue. Those who want development in a community, so let's say the economic development people, and those who maybe don't want development in the community, conservation, preservation. Both have legitimate perspectives. But we usually end up in this position of they're pitted against each other. So we have to save the open space, right? We can't develop on it. But for others, we need economic development. And if we're gonna have economic development, then we need to build things. Neither one is right, neither one is wrong. But we end up in this either or debate or discussion. So I like this idea of gives and gets. If you want something, you need to give something. So let's just use the open space example. Open space is perfectly fine. Oftentimes, we want the developer to provide the open space. But the fact is, if it truly is a community goal, then the community should be budgeting for the purchase and acquisition of open space. So you're giving tax dollars to get the open space you want. And my bigger point is that whole kind of, there's always gonna be a level of give and get, especially in a democracy. We're never gonna get everything we want, no future development, or everything we want, tons of future development. So it's how do we find this balance? So let me move into some market conditions because I think they're extremely important and they definitely play a role in the challenges that are confronted, that we have to confront in the context of Bloomfield Town Center. Sorry. In the context of demand, market demand, and especially in the context of real estate, whether it's the construction of new real estate, construction of commercial space, construction of residential space, or whether it's the occupancy of spaces, four things become really important. Job growth is number one. If jobs are growing, then population is typically growing. If jobs aren't growing, population's typically not growing. So jobs are the key demand driver for most things. Population is also extremely important. To provide a Connecticut context to job growth, and we'll look a bit at Harford County and Bloomfield later on, but between 1985 and 1990, Connecticut added 104,000 jobs. 5-year period, 104,000 jobs. From 1990 to 2020, pre-pandemic, January 1st, 2020. Over that 30-year period, Connecticut added 45,000 jobs. Job growth in Connecticut over the past 34 years has been mostly stagnant. And that makes development, economic development, really challenging. Population growth has also been mostly anemic. Connecticut from 2010 to 2020 had 1% population growth. That's kind of a meaningless number, 1%. It's better than a negative number, but it's still just 1%. Harford County had 1% growth over the same period of time. We'll get to Bloomfield later on. Household formations in the context of housing are the most important demand driver for housing. So long as you can have some demand without job and population growth in the housing market through household formations. And what do I mean by that? Household formation is a new household in the marketplace. So it could be a new job that attracts a new person, and they become the new household, or their family becomes the new household. It could also be a divorce. Two people living under one roof, and they separate, and they become a new household. They could also be your 27-year-old child who's still living in your basement and refuses to leave. Once they finally leave, that person becomes a new household formation. I'm going to come back to that a bit later when we look at some demographics, and we'll see kind of how Connecticut, with little job growth, little population growth, has still had a reasonable amount of demand for housing. And then the last driver is income, household income or per capita. Income doesn't necessarily drive demand itself, but it becomes an indicator of where demand will kind of organize. That is, the higher the income, the different types of demand that are created. And I'll touch on that again later. Next slide. A few things about real estate and a few things about the buildings that exist within the town center. Real estate is fixed in its location. You can't move it, right? So think about your car. Whether you live in Bloomfield or whether you live in Manchester or someplace else in Connecticut, your car can move with you, and you can sell it in Manchester, you can sell it in Bloomfield, you can sell it in Enfield. It moves around. You can't move a building, right? So the value of a house or the value of a commercial property, say in Bloomfield Center, its value is tied to what else is around it, the quality of the property and so forth. So that old idea, location, location, location. Location is extremely important. It's not as important as people saying location, 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 but it becomes important because the property is fixed in that location. Construction products, buildings, houses are durable. They last a long time. And I'll come back to that with a couple examples. It's also temporal. What's built at a given moment is based on what the market wants at a given moment. My parents' house was built in 1956. It's on a quarter-acre lot. It was originally 1,000 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 1-car garage. And that was a optimal kind of middle-class house in 1956. Today, the average house being constructed, new construction, would be 2,100 square feet, would be 3+ bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, one of which is en suite because you don't want to share it with the kids, right? And a 2-car garage and something larger than a quarter-acre lot. In that context, you can already see that my parents' house is deficient. It doesn't meet today's marketplace. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value and there's not demand for it, but it's not the primary product. So what's being constructed is always serving the market at that moment in time. Creative destruction is the idea that things, processes that come about today, new innovation, creatively destroys that which came before it. For example, that 2,100 square foot house creatively destroys or impacts my parents' 1956 house. And then functional obsolescence, which is kind of If you don't continually invest in the property, whether it's a commercial property in town center or whether it's your house, and newer product is constantly being constructed, you run the risk of becoming functionally obsolescent and not able to compete in the marketplace. Next slide. So, seeing the average age is a bit older in this room tonight, how many of you remember 1950s downtown Hartford and shopping at G-Fox? I'm actually just old enough to remember the end of G-Fox. 1980s, I remember going there and so forth. It wasn't what it was, you know, in the earlier days. G-Fox was kind of the peak value intersection of retail in the 1950s. That's where the highest rent would have been. Come 1970s, and West Farms Mall's constructed 7 miles outside of the city center. G-Fox opened their first suburban location at that moment in time at that mall, and that became the peak value intersection. That was the most valuable retail real estate in the marketplace. And then Blueback Square came along in the early 2000s, and that became the peak value in the Hartford market. The idea is, remember, location, 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 right? Well, the location of retail has been shifting and changing over the past 7 decades. It hasn't remained in the same place. That's a change. A lot of us mourn the passing of G-Fox, right? We probably also mourn the passing of a past era of Winterberry Mall, right? But times have changed. And that's part of what we are trying to address. How do we address that change, and how do we do it in a way that we can still have a vibrant and prosperous center? Next slide. Creative destruction. How many of you grew up with this telephone? It's rare that I actually gets hands raised on that one, but I'll take it. That's great. There's a couple of you there. I know my mom talks about growing up in the south end of Hartford and the party line phones. And my mom's such a kind of nosy person. I'm sure she was hanging out on those party line phones. But those have gone away mostly. Some of us may still have a landline. I don't. But the fact is, these things that we call smartphones have creatively destroyed all those phones that came before us. And the irony is, the thing I do least on this is use it as a phone. And, you know, texting is so common, emailing so common, social media is so common, that I actually get annoyed when my phone rings. Like, do I have to talk to you? But we still call them phones, even though they do a lot of other things. Next slide. So let's talk about change in the context of demographics. The chart on the left, you can't see the numbers on it, but I'm going to explain it to you. The first thing I want to direct your attention to is the red bars at the bottom line. The first one on the left side is married couples with children, 1970s America. 40% of households in America were married couples with children. 2012 is the far right. It was down to 19.6. 2020, it was down to 19%. Half of the married couple households with children have gone away. If you remember an era, I grew up in a neighborhood where there were tons of children and we were always outside and making noise and doing whatever. And now we kind of say kids don't play outside. Well, the first thing we have to realize is there's a lot fewer houses with kids. And those houses with kids have fewer kids, and I'll get to that. Other parts of this, now there are more families with children than just married couples. And those have increased, and they're in the middle here. Other family households. But these two categories, women living alone and men living alone, the single person household has increased greatly. So in 1960 America, only 13% of households were single persons. Today, nationwide, 28%. Connecticut, 29.9% of households are single person. Think about that. 30% of households will not produce a child, do not have a child associated with them. Another 25 to 30%, depending on where we're looking, is it Bloomfield, is it Connecticut, is it the US? Another 25 to 30% are two-person households. So nearly 60% of households are one and two-person households. That is a huge change. That means your community, if you hadn't added a single house over, say, the past 30 years, it's possible that you could have lost thousands of people in population because household sizes contracted. Just above the bottom bar, that lighter color bar, that's the most interesting one. That's married couples without children, 29%, and 30% at the start, 29% at the end. That has not changed, married couples without children. It's the same today as it was 50 years ago. Next slide, please. So let's look at some other things. The chart on the left, the yellow line on the bottom, is food away from home, eating out at a restaurant, starting in 1950. That's 1950, that's 1970. And the line on the top is food at home. So you could interpret that as grocery stores, right? You purchase the food at the grocery store and you eat it at home, versus you go out to eat someplace or you get your food takeaway from someplace. Look at those two trend lines. And then look at there, around 2015, they cross. Food away from home becomes more common than food in the house. Look at 1970, restaurant industry sales in billions, 42 billion nationwide, versus 2017, 798 billion. So 40 into 80, what do we have? A 20-fold increase in restaurant sales. Go back to the previous slide, Derek. Do you think maybe the change in household structure relates to that? More single persons, more slight differences there. Next slide. Employment market. I'm going to move through some of these a little bit quickly. This goes back to, what's the start year there? Derek saved my eyes. 1994 job growth. At 540,000 jobs, just above it. It peaks at, 540,000, and it peaks at what there? 590. Then it drops off into the COVID, and then you see a recovery occurring at the end out to 23. My point being there, if you look at the start point and the end point, across the Hartford labor market, which captures about 40 communities or so, there hasn't been a lot of job growth. It's been very minimal. I would put it in the context of, positive stagnation. It's going up a little bit, but not great. Next slide, unemployment over the same period of time. You can see the spike at COVID here near the right-hand side, and then the drop to the current rate. Unemployment still being very low in the Hartford labor market. Next slide. We then broke down, and I'm not going to go into great detail here, but we looked at service. We looked at employment sectors. So historical employment trends in the Hartford labor market, and we look at how many in healthcare, how many in this, how many in that, and to get an idea of what's going on. And there's some, I'm trying to look there. The largest private employment sectors include health services, manufacturing, and retail trade. There's good news in that, and there's poor news in that. Health services are a national trend. Why? Because all you baby boomers are aging, so healthcare has become a huge industry. So we kind of expect that. We also recognize that because of our insurance industries here, that health and insurance have been a big part of our labor force, so we expect those. Manufacturing increases are good. We're seeing some increases in manufacturing, which for a long time we didn't. And you guys have some great manufacturers here in your very own community. Retail trade is up. In some ways, that's good. You can also say there's a negative side of that. Health services, jobs, an insurance job probably pays better than, say, some retail jobs. So we have to look at kind of the dynamics within these. There has been some contraction. Private employment sectors with the largest decreases in employment: administrative, retail trade, and also non-durable goods, with a slight increase. Next slide. And then we looked at some real estate market. Oh no, I'm sorry, this is still employment, and it's unemployment. Bloomfield's at the top. You guys still have a very low unemployment rate of 3.7%, but you are trending a little higher than Connecticut at 3.2, or 3.4, and Hartford labor market at 3.5. But unemployment rates below 4% are really good. Next slide. Quick overview of the real estate market. We looked at asset classes: industrial, office, retail. We looked at Bloomfield on the top, Greater Hartford market on the bottom. The rents, we looked at vacancy, number of buildings, vacancy, rents, and sale prices per square foot, and then cap rates. At the end of the day, you're a little weaker on industrial rents, $7.78 a square foot versus $8.89 across the region. Your office rents are a little bit higher at $21 versus $20, and your retail rents are running a bit lower, $16 versus $18. And then the same thing with those other categories, there's slight differences. But it gives us a context. One of the big things that it gives us a context on is kind of what market rents are, which then help to inform us about the potential for new construction. The higher the rents, the easier it is to finance and cover new construction. The lower the rents, the more challenging. Next slide. This last set of data takes the tapestry stuff that I was talking about to a new realm. So some of you may have been like, wow, I didn't realize, these people knew so much about my shopping habits from my Stop and Shop card and my ATM machine. This geofencing software we have is cell phone data. Basically, your cell phone, either your GPS is on and there's a satellite signal, right? Or it's always pinging off of two towers, and you can triangulate, that location, and the location of the cell phone. So we have a software where we can draw a boundary around something. One building, a town center, a whole town, a street, and we can find out about all the people that have been there. Now, nothing personal about them, but we know how many cell phones ping from that location. So we dropped a geofence on both Winterberry Mall and Kickoff. And we wanted to see what's the difference in activities. Kickoff is a occupied, busy center out on a busy street versus Winterberry has been a struggling, retail center in the town center. What is the differences here? So next slide. And that's Winterberry in orange, visitors by day of the week, yearly, versus Kickoff in blue by day of the week, yearly. And that tells you a really dramatic story. In some ways it could be negative, in some ways it's just data, but we know that one place, and we knew this already, was doing much better than the other. Next slide. We can also look at time of day when those visitations happen. Whoop, next slide there. Thank you. We can also look at time of day, and that's always fascinating for me. The uptick through the morning, you peak around lunchtime when people are out running errands, and then a little dip into the afternoon, and spike up in the evening time when people are on their way home and so forth. So we can see those activities by hour. Next slide. And percent of visit duration. We can look at how long did that cell phone stay at that location. And what you can see is the lower minutes, the lower stays, 5 to 9 minutes, 10 to 14, 15 to 19. These are really quick shopping routines. Run in, get something, grab some takeout food, drop off the dry cleaning, whatever it is, are driving those activities versus the longer stays and the shorter times later. Next slide. Historical visits. They get the picture. We'll go on the next slide. Oh, sorry, go back. Winterberry Mall, you see a decline in recent times. The most recent past 2 years or so versus kind of stability at Capaco. Next slide. We then looked at traffic counts. For retailers, it's really important. How many vehicles a day pass in front of a site? And we have low traffic counts in the town center. And then next slide. We then looked at Capaco. So, 5,000 to 8,000 trips per day on the streets in the town center versus right out in front of Capaco, 12 to 13,000 per day. Those are substantially different numbers, and it shows you kind of part of the reason why Capaco, is doing better is because higher volumes of traffic. Next slide. We wanted to try and understand who's coming to Bloomfield Center. So we took 2 restaurants that we know have kind of regional name recognition, one being the Republic and one being Carbone's. And we dropped geofences on them, wanting to see what we learned. So the most customers coming to Republic are coming out of Bloomfield, but you can see picking up customers out of Suffield and South Windsor. Is that South Windsor? Yeah. Windsor is South Windsor. West Hartford is a big draw, Simsbury and so forth. So we know that we have this regional draw. Next slide. We also looked at the tapestry. They're drawing a segment called Savvy Suburbanites. And the key thing to know at this point is your top 3 segments for Bloomfield did not include Savvy Suburbanites. So I can say they're attracting a different consumer than maybe the majority of resident segmentations here in Bloomfield. That's not good or bad, it's just we just know there's a difference. And then next slide, we also could look at ethnic makeup based on the census data that they tie back to and so forth, and Republic's serving a diversity of ethnicities. And then they're serving a wide range of income brackets on the right, but households earning over 150,000 are the ones spiking on the far right there. So they're serving kind of a higher income household. The median household income is 123,000 for their customers. Next slide. And then we were able to look at days of week. It kind of makes sense. Fridays and Saturdays are the busiest in a restaurant like Republic, right? And their busiest time is in the evening hours, even though they do have a lunchtime trade also. So that made sense. Next slide. We then did the same with Carbone's. Heavier on their draw from Bloomfield, still drawing on a regional level, similar towns and so forth. Next slide. Also serving a wide ethnicity of populations. Similar breakdown on the incomes of the households they're serving. Median income 121,000, the 150 plus is the highest, but you see a little more on the lower end of incomes there, that they're attracting a wider range of incomes than actually Republic is. And next slide, then once again, days of week, hours of day, very similar, what we would expect, and pause right there. The time of day becomes important to me. I don't like making comparisons to the West Hartford Center, but I need to do this for this comparison. If anyone remembers West Hartford Center back in the 1990s, before it became what it is today, or back in the 1980s, it was busy between kind of 8 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock at night. When I interviewed the first 5 restaurants that went in there for research I was doing, it was kind of funny that the type of descriptions I got of the center in 1995 was, you could shoot a gun down the street and not hit anyone, you could throw a grenade in the parking lot and not harm anyone. Really weird narratives, but just this, trying to make you understand, like, there was no one there. A big change in West Hartford Center is times of days, and that was the addition of the restaurants. It was no longer just busy during the day up to 6 in the evening. It then became busy up until 8, 9, and 10 o'clock at night. And then a bar scene emerged, and it continued busy to 11, 12, and 1 o'clock at night. So now they have like a functional 18 hours a day of activity going on there, where they used to only have maybe 10 hours of activity. And that changes value on real estate. That real estate's making more money because it's more active, longer parts of the day. So we can start thinking about Bloomfield Town Center in that sense. When are we attracting people? How are we attracting them? What are they doing? So, enough of me for tonight. We have some community engagement activities for you. And I'm going to intro with this because I told you we're going to talk about coffee first, but it leads you into it. So next slide. I told you that community in Louisiana told me they wanted a Starbucks. And what they were really telling me is they wanted to be middle class. So I ask you, what type of coffee community do you think Bloomfield is? I say this kindly, but are you crappy gas station coffee? Is that where you buy your coffee? Are you Dunkin' Donuts, which American runs on and everyone loves? Oh, I'm supposed to say Dunkin' now, there's no donuts anymore, right? Or are you Starbucks? Or are you a private, independent coffee shop community? So, how many love gas station coffee? No one's gonna admit, come on, there's gotta be someone. Someone, okay, there we go. We've got one. How many are Dunkin' coffee? Dunkin's always the favorite, people love it. How many are Starbucks? I'm guilty, I stopped there, I needed a drink to get through tonight. It's tea though, it's not coffee. And how many are independent coffee? Some of you. So actually I would say you guys are everything, right? You cover all of it, you have all of it. You have Starbucks, which is great. Not every community can attract a Starbucks. That means in some circumstances you have wealth, right? At least a certain level of wealth that Starbucks requires. It also means you have large employers and trip generators, and you have good traffic counts out on that main road on Cottage Grove. And it becomes an ideal location for that kind of business. And that kind of business, as you also see with even with the Dunkin' Donuts, what do they want? Drive-throughs, right? Because actually, if you look at a lot of Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, 60 to 80% of the business is actually coming through the drive-through window, not through the inside. That's why you have a standalone drive-through Dunkin' Donuts out there on Cottage Grove. Dunkin' made the decision, we don't need the inside. And in this circumstance, the drive-through is the best. This starts telling us about opportunities or lack of opportunities in other places. So next slide, and next slide, because I want to move along, I've run longer than I wanted to. We have 5 activities for you to do in the back of the room. One is called Continuums of Change. I don't like yes and no. I don't like black and white. I don't like either ors. I think in the realm of things, there's a lot of gray. So we pose questions to you to compare like retail versus commercial, or this versus that. And we give you stickers, and you place your answer on the continuum. Do you want more development or less development? And yes, some of you will put it outside the continuum saying, I want even less than less. But I want to know where you think you are on that continuum, because that helps me read you as a community and kind of, I interpret it as like risk appetite. If you're telling me you don't want something, well, how much do you not want it? Do I have a chance to push you a bit, persuade you a bit? or do we just give up on it? So these continuums give us a lot of good information. Then we ask you to do an activity to invest in your town, and this is really kind of awful on our part. So you're given $100. You have a $50 bill, you have a $20 bill, you have two tens and two fives. So you have 6 bills. You can't make change. I'll follow you around. You can't make change. But you have like 8 or 9 things to invest in. So you can't pay for everything that we give you as an option, and you have to place your 50 in something. So you have to make a hard decision on how you want to invest your money. We also know how many packets of money we give out, so we know how much money's out there, and we know how many of each notes. So not only is it the thing that gets the most money that's important, we also know how many people actually voted on each category. So this gives us a lot of information about where you're willing to invest in the center. Wants and desires, community amenities, and community investment opportunities. If I can read this. We ask you to rate things in rank order from 5 being most desired and 1 being least desired. So there's a bunch of things you rank them. Then prouds and sorries. We give you Post-it notes, and we want you to tell us 3 things you are proud about in Bloomfield Center, and 3 things you are sorry about. And that kind of becomes, community pride or strengths, and then community shame and weaknesses. It starts informing us about how you view the town center. And then the last activity, and you don't have to do these in order, you can go to any station where there's an opportunity, is existing conditions and future outcomes. We ask you for words describing Bloomfield Center today, and then we ask you for words describing Bloomfield Center in the future if it has improved. And these start helping us kind of gauge how you view the center now, and hopefully an improved center in the future. With that said, you can't run out the door, you have to go do the activities. But once you do the activities, you are free to go. You're not coming back to me. I thank you so much. There will be more programs along the way.